Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Brion Hurley. I am the presenter today to talk about financial benefits for process improvement. I used to live in Portland. I was also in St. Louis recently. Now I'm in Iowa area, kind of bouncing around a lot of places. We'll just say Iowa. And so, yeah, today I just wanted to go through some topics around what do we do to capture benefits of process improvement. And I am not an expert in the finance part of it, but I'm going to go through what I learned and how I was taught how to look at these different topics. And so I hope to bring some light to maybe a different way for you to think about documenting and capturing the results and why that's important and some of the different buckets of money. So that was my plan for today. Welcome. This is our Lean Portland monthly happy hour. We are a group of Lean Six Sigma professionals who extend our expertise into the community, believe in sharing our methods, resources, and project results with the community so we may all learn from our successes and mistakes. And our mission is to helping people make work better. So you can visit our website, you can reach out to us through email, we have a Slack channel, and then you may have found us through the Eventbrite page, and we also have a LinkedIn group. This is the first Tuesday of the month. We've been doing happy hours for many years now. And we have different topics and different presenters and activities, sometimes presentations, sometimes networking activities, lots of fun stuff. Have you had any in-person ones yet?
Not since before
pandemic?
COVID.
Okay, all right. Well, it started off as an in-person event. We also do some workshops. We're doing them virtually now, of course, but we did have some in-person workshops we used to do. Where we can help develop new instructors. So we're really have a wide variety of people with expertise. So if you're new to Lean, that's great. If you have a lot of experience, that's great. We like to bring in everybody who's interested. Go ahead.
Brian, we have one coming out. I'm doing a Lean 101 on July 26th at noon Pacific time.
Okay.
We try to repeat that one over and over again, but if there's something that there's a lot of Lean Six Sigma experience in the room here. If there's something that you want to teach or just put out there, we've got a platform for you.
And then the other piece is we do pro bono consulting. So we work with local nonprofits and help them look at their processes and give them tips and advice and help them work through improving their process. And so trying to help them have bigger impact in the community. We've been doing that for quite a few years. And do you have any new ones coming up we need to promote or?
Not right now.
Okay.
I'll just, as an example, we did a couple of we did one process, process mapping workshop with a community center. And then with that same community center, we did a little bit of strategy work with them a couple months ago.
So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Also, we're trying to continuously improve that process and streamline it, make it more value added for our organizations we're working with and for the volunteers. So, so the first thing I want to do is just kind of go over the reason we want to capture benefits, because it does take a little bit of extra time to do this. So why spend the time on that? Well, the first thing is that a lot of times management, that's their language, right? Is they get a budget and they're held to those budgets. And so that's one of the primary ways that they get managed and held accountable. And so if we can convert a lot of the problems we're working on into money, then it speaks their language and it gets the attention and the way that they think. So that's really important when we're trying to make improvements. We'd love to think that everybody is doing it for altruistic reasons and because it's the right thing to do, but sometimes it comes down to I have goals and budgets I have to meet. The other thing is really to show the impact of the improvements to the business that says this stuff is helping our organization save money in addition to improving quality and saving time and engaging our employees. Also with prioritization so that we can pick the right projects to work on. There's always going to be more projects that you could do than you have time for or the resources. And so we always want to be making sure that we're focused in the right area and we're spending our time wisely. and just trying to make sure that we understand if I have 5 or 10 different projects, which ones are the best ones I should be working on. It also gives us a validation that the improvements are actually working and that we've seen it all the way through. There's a lot of times we do a lot of actions and improvements, but when we go back to check the validity of that data, it's not there, or something didn't get all the way resolved, or didn't get fully implemented, or it doesn't really flow down to a way in which finance or management can see the impact. And usually that's in terms of we freed up resources, but we didn't redeploy those resources. And now we're still paying the same budget, and we're not getting more output out. And that's because maybe we didn't take advantage and redeploy resources in the right area. So that might show up when you start to look at some of these calculations. And a lot of organizations will actually require, for larger projects, they'll require that finance is involved and does some kind of sign off or validation of that. And of course, money is important, but we also don't want to just look at money. We need to look at it broadly, and some things are hard to measure financially or putting into dollars. Things like improving customer satisfaction by giving better products and services, developing people. I mean, some things we can kind of measure with turnover and retention, but there's a lot of things you can't measure. And how good of a steward you are in the local community and how respected your company is. That's really hard to put a dollar amount to. So those are things that we want. So we don't want to make it the all-encompassing effort to get financial benefits, or it doesn't matter. It's just that if we can, let's try to capture that. So I'm going to walk through some ways we can do that. So these are the 5 buckets I'm going to walk through. So I'll define each of these, and I'll talk about examples, and then we'll kind of go through an exercise to recap and see if there's any questions. So if you have some examples of recent projects, maybe we could talk through that. Okay, so income statement is probably the most common one, and this is what we would call like the hard savings. And the way that I was taught is that to capture a hard savings, you have to have already been spending the money on it. So you have to have shown that you used to have that cost in your budget, and now that cost has gone away. So you were spending a certain amount of money for materials, and now it's lower, maybe through design changes or some improvements, or you change the requirements, loosen the requirements, or you negotiated a price change. And so they could say, yeah, we used to spend that much money and now it's less. If you were negotiating first time and you were able to lower it, but you've never bought from this person before, that would be more like a soft savings because you never have actually paid for that money yet. If you have expenses, so you're paying for a storage facility and you now don't need that facility anymore and you let that go, that would be a hard savings. Or your rent or mortgage goes down, or your office supply costs go down, utility costs, healthcare costs, insurance, advertising, those things. If you could show that you were previously spending a certain amount of money and now that is less, then you could say that's a hard savings. Labor costs can be captured. These are often soft savings, and I'll talk about that later. But if you have overtime reduction, where you say we were usually spending 5 or 10% each week of overtime, and now we're not doing that, you could capture that. If you have lower salaries, maybe you've redefined the job or simplified the job so much that you don't need the same experience level to run that job, that could be potentially a hard savings. Or you have like legal fees that you're paying and now you've reduced risk and now you don't have to use their services as much. So those would be other examples. So I'll go through all 5. So then it'll tie it all together and then we can kind of pause for questions there. So the second one would be cash flow. This is the money that's accessible to us to pay our expenses, to invest in new things, maybe just leave it in the bank and let it earn interest. So usually the most common area we look for cash flow is in inventory, where our money is tied up in materials and items. And that's money I can't go and spend on something else because it's wrapped up in a bunch of boxes of supplies, right? And that's money that I had to take out of the bank account. And now it's stuck just sitting there in our process. And that's why from a lean perspective, inventory looked negatively, whereas outside of maybe a lot of lean companies, inventory is often looked as a positive thing because it means, it doesn't mean this. People assume that if you have a lot of inventory, then thus you must be having a lot of sales coming through very shortly. But we look at it from the risk perspective that there's a lot of extra costs that go along with that, including that the money's not available to you. So if you're reducing your inventory because you can flow the process better and you don't need as much, or you have smaller target stock levels or safety stock levels, or you're able to consign out products to a customer where you don't pay for them until you consume them. So you maybe bring them in-house, but you don't pay for it until you actually use it. That could be ways to lower your cash flow. You could also reduce investment or capital costs in future products or services. You could reduce accounts receivable time by turning around the money faster. So and a lot of companies play around with this a lot. They'll say, well, instead of paying in 45 days, we're going to pay our suppliers in net 60 days. Not a good way of doing that, but that's the way a lot of companies will do cash flow to improve that. I would say that's a bad short-term decision because it doesn't help the relationships very well. Or another way I really have been thinking about cash flow is around projects. So if we are working on a project, the company is paying us some money each week or every other week for our salary or hourly rate. And until we get that project complete, the company is investing over and over again. And so that's another reason why we want to work on projects and complete them quickly, so the company can recoup the investment that they paid into your time on those projects. And so a lot of times we see people have 6, 7, 8 projects they're managing all at once. And until any of those are complete, that's just eating a bunch of cash flow and employee time that's not turning into tangible results for the organization. So that's another example. So it's not just inventory of materials, it's actually inventory of our time and resources. And a lot of companies struggle and actually go out of business, not because they don't have customers, because they don't manage their cash flow very well. They order too much of stuff. They anticipate sales that don't actually come through. They hire too quickly. And so they end up in trouble with that. So managing that cash flow is really important. And so the cost savings would be that I lowered inventory or I lowered some of these costs, and that left that money in the bank. And the value would be that that money could earn interest at a certain rate, whether it's 5% interest or 8% or 10% interest. It's called the cost of capital. And so if I didn't have to use that $100,000, that could have been in the bank earning interest. So that's one way we can capture the benefits of that. Another bucket of money, and these are buckets because we're not going to combine them all into one number. We have to keep them separate. So the growth would be the third one, where we are looking to fulfill demand from customer that we can't currently fulfill. So if because if I just sell more of the product faster, that's more cash flow. Growth really means that customers are going away and leaving because we don't have the demand. So we run out of stuff and there are customers there that want it. Versus difference between just increasing capacity, which says I could make more of these, or we're making more of them, but they're sitting on a shelf, or we're not utilizing those resources or providing that service right now, but we could handle 3 more clients. We just don't have them right now. That's different. Growth is you already have the demand there. You have to show that it was unfulfilled demand and now you're fulfilling it. So we'd invest in, improving that process, and now we can meet those orders. So anything additional that you were losing before, you can now say is growth. And also just kind of looking at freeing up resources to offer new products or services. Again, that would be the soft savings because you don't have the actual sales there. And then once new growth comes in there and you are fulfilling demand that you would not have been able to do previously, then you could take that as growth benefit. Okay, so those are the 3 main buckets for the hard savings, and then we'll talk about a couple others here, avoidance, and then some soft savings. So avoidance would be, I was planning to spend money on something, but now I don't need to. This is usually where we go into the year with a budget and we say, I didn't use up all that budget. If that money, now if you reduce something, where like in the original like income statement part where I said we were spending a certain amount of money and we reduced it down, then you could say hard savings. If it's just, we were planning to buy these things, we were planning to spend this money, but I didn't have to spend as much, or I didn't spend anything, then you could say it's avoidance. I avoided spending money, but it's not the same as hard savings, because the question gets into, would you have really spent that or not? And so that's where it gets a little tricky, is like, well, everyone could say, well, we were going to spend this money, but who really knows for sure? And so finance usually doesn't like that. They want to see that this is actually real money that we're spending. And also like improvements made during design and development, where you're improving the design, the product or service before it goes into like production mode, or the service before you start reaching out to clients and customers about it. Again, you don't really know what the cost would have been. So you're kind of guessing that this is what it would have cost us, or what we would have been spending, but we hadn't been spending that money yet. So if you were just changing the design of the product or service afterwards, and you already had a baseline, then you could say now that design change to our process or our product or service is improved. And now that's more of a hard savings. So if you save space and no longer need to expand the building, or to move to a larger building. So I had one site I was working with, and they were asking for a capital expense to expand the building. The leadership pushed back and says, I don't think you've done enough 5S. Come back to us after you've really pushed through all these different improvement ideas. They came back and said, yep, we figured out some products we don't really do anymore. We got them redeployed to another site. We have the room now. We don't need to spend that money on that project of expanding the building. That would be cost avoidance. Canceling job recs. You know, we were going to hire 2 people, but now we're not. We don't need to, because maybe we improved the process so much we don't actually need those 2 people right now. We were going to get penalized by our customer, but we talked our way out of it, and now they're not going to charge us for that. Cost avoidance. Cost savings would be, maybe you're already getting penalized for them and you renegotiated a lower penalty, let's say, or you fixed the problem that was causing it. Those could be hard savings because you were then already paying that penalty price. And a lot of the risk mitigation and prevention activities are going to fall under this avoidance. And then soft savings will be typically the time savings reductions. So let's say I've got a process that takes an hour and I can get it down to 30 minutes. That's going to be a soft savings, because with that freed up 30 minutes, what do we do at that time? If we can if we can fulfill unmet demand, it could fall under a growth bucket. If we are now taking that extra 30 minutes and improving the process and saving money somewhere else, there's potential it could hit some of those core 3 buckets. But we could also just have someone sit there for 30 minutes. And we actually didn't recuperate, or we didn't actually recoup the actual savings. It just kind of disappeared. You know, someone who used to spend an hour in the process can get it done in 30 minutes, but they let it stretch out to an hour still. Because now I can do it a little slower. So the time savings are really tricky, because we have to do something with that time to turn it into an actual benefit somewhere. And that's the thing that I've been told, is we can't really tell if that time is actually being leveraged for something more positive. So we got to think about where's that going to show up, and how do we make sure that it shows up there? It could free up a whole person where you don't need to let's say, rehire someone new. So I had one project where we had someone who was going to retire. They were part of a process. We improved the process so they didn't have to be in the loop anymore. Basically, they were doing an inspection process. We said we got the improvements and the defects down so far that we didn't need to go through them anymore. That person retired, and they didn't backfill that job. So that one is actually a hard savings because we were spending that money and they didn't need that position anymore. But if we freed up one person's work, but that person still works there, they're still getting a salary, they're still getting paid. And so the company looks at it from the top level and says, I don't see anything different. But if that person could then, that freed up person could go off and add more value somewhere else, and they see higher output and more sales or unmet demand, or they are now helping reduce the cost of a process, there could be a hard savings later. But the idea is that just because we save time doesn't mean it's going to flow down to the bottom line, or that it's noticeable from a finance standpoint. So again, the budgets are typically sometimes soft savings, because again, we haven't really spent that money yet. Again, increasing capacity, also like a soft savings. We could get more stuff done. We just don't have that demand yet. And then there's lots of other things that kind of fall under soft savings that are hard to measure. Safety improvements, loss of sales. You know, your customers are upset and they leave. We don't really know what the impact is, but we can estimate some of those things to say, I know like we would use this soft savings for like, the customer could penalize us this amount of money per incident, and we've had this many incidences. We lowered the number of incidences, so therefore we saw the soft savings is that we reduced the risk of us getting penalized a certain amount, even though they've never penalized us formally for that. So that would be kind of like a soft savings. Customer and employee satisfaction, hard to measure, hard to quantify. Same with like community environmental enhancements. Those things are also more like soft savings. Let's go through a couple examples here for estimating soft savings. And so this is a real simple way I look at it. What's the time and what's the labor rate? And we can do some rough number calculations of the time impact. Again, these would still be considered soft savings, but it does give us an idea of the impact to the organization potentially. So manufacturing example would be process takes 45 minutes. You reduce it by 15 minutes down to 30 minutes. And then the task is done 8 times per day. And so if you take 8 times a day times 15 minutes, you get about 2 hours a day of savings, right? If they were paid at $30 per hour, 2 hours per day, roughly about $60 per day of labor savings cost that we would potentially incur. And if you did that over 200 working days a year, let's say out of the calendar year, that could be potentially $12,000 per year. So that's one way you can try to estimate time savings with impact. Again, that $12,000 is soft savings because it's not real. They're still going to show up to work. They're still going to get paid their 8 hours over the 200 days. It's what do we do with those 2 hours every day to take advantage of that extra time? We have to put it to good use. And then on the healthcare side, a nurse walks 12 feet to grab towels. We reduce that 2 feet, and that saves 5 seconds each time. He or she does that task 30 times per day. They save 5 seconds, and then there's 30 times a day, 150 seconds per day. That's done every day. 54,000 seconds or 15 hours per year. They get paid a $50 per hour rate. That's $750 per year. Another thing that comes up is, what is the actual labor rate? Is it the cost that the employee makes, or is it the burden cost of insurance and all the benefits that go with it? So I think usually most people are recommending use the full cost that the company incurs, which could be is the it's not it's burden rate. I can't remember if that's the right term or not, but it's the costs that you pay them plus all the benefits they receive, which is a lot more than just the rate that they make.
You have overhead.
Yeah, it's the total cost that employee has on the organization.
When I budget for research grants, I have the salary plus 150%. The 50% includes whatever costs for the department and other things like that.
Yep.
Same thing for anywhere else.
Right. So yeah, we want to look at all those costs. So let me pause there. Any questions so far? I saw a couple hands raised or chats.
Okay, so I'm wondering in the healthcare example, would you then take that and 750 and multiply it by the number of nurses if there's multiple nurses using that station or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then here's an idea. What if you got to the 750 and in order to like incentivize coming up with improvements like this, that you give half back to the nurse?
Yeah.
A bonus.
So that's
here's like $375.
That's a great topic of how do we incentivize people for improvement, and is a financial investment or payback for projects a good way to do that? And so
because it would only be a one-time expense, but then it would come out of the expense rate for the organization forever going forward.
Yep. So I've seen good and bad results from that. Definitely does motivate people. Sometimes the calculations and stuff like that get a little messy. And then some people will say, well, if I'm not even going to waste my time on that, like I'm looking for big savings. So it discourages small daily improvements. And then gets into, well, I want my project tracked and I want mine approved. And so there can be some bureaucracy that slows down our goal of engaging as many people as possible in improvements. But I will say that for some big projects, I have gotten some financial benefits out of it. I got some stock options on a really big project I did. And so I think there's some different tiered things that can be done. If you look at the Kaizen Tian approach, where the workers get together with the support team and come up with improvement ideas, and then they get some points, and then those can be cashed in for prizes and stuff. So I think there's some ways to leverage that without it getting too technical, but I definitely think if someone's coming up with an idea that's saving significant amount of money, that should be incentivized, and there should be ways to recognize that, maybe financially, maybe through other recognition, other benefits, days off. I think that's definitely something to consider. Any other questions about the different buckets of money?
In LinkedIn, they were discussing even today, there's a bunch of Lean Six Sigma types running around on LinkedIn, and they're talking about they applied some of this stuff and made the process simpler, and went from 3 people to 2 people. So the bosses, the management fired the third person.
Yeah, that's a huge mistake.
Yes. So how would you do that?
Yeah. So with any improvement, if you are going to do this long term, you cannot lay people off, or it'll drive the culture in the wrong direction, and people will be afraid to make improvements because their job or their coworkers' jobs might be in jeopardy. So the best companies that are doing a process improvement come out right out the beginning and say, we will not do any layoffs as a result of process improvement, to alleviate that risk. The goal is really should be a growth opportunity to say, we now have 3 extra people. What can we do with our customers to add more products or services and meet that demand that, they've been asking for all these extra features, all these extra things that we could do. That's what we want to take and leverage our people to do. And it may not be those 2 or 3 freed up people that can do it, but we can shift people around a little bit and say, how do I get this person freed up who can now develop that next service? And now we're coming to our customers and saying, those things we said we didn't have the resources for, we've got them now. let's talk about what other value we can give to you. And that's how you really can grow. But a lot of companies, they see those dollars and they see those resources and say, boy, I could really help my budget this year. But they don't realize the culture that drives and that negativity it creates in the organization. And so definitely, I would not recommend anybody lay people off, because that's just not the way to go. Great comment. Is there another one? Another
One question.
Yeah.
I know that the answer could be it depends, but specifically for you, Brian, what do you think the best combination, if you had to pick like one or two of these buckets, immediately comes to mind when you think about the companies that books are written after, or the companies that like you've worked for or seen process improvements for? Is it cash flow? Is cash flow king or hard savings king? Like, what do you think makes companies adaptable and
So you're talking
aggressive
about
and like
embracing like
kind of
improvement, or like success of the company?
success of the company due to these interworkings, these underlying improvements? What do you think is like the most shining example of where you've seen a company like time and time again do X? It's like, wow, this company's really good at bringing out cash flow.
Yeah.
That's why there's like 18 books written after them. This is what Wiremold did, or something like that. Do you have something that like pops in your head based off of what you've seen?
I would say that the companies that do it well, they don't care about the cost savings, honestly. This is not a motivator. They're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do. It's good for their customers. They know the cost savings are there. They know the money's there. They know that engagement of their employees has a positive ROI. They know that it's going to save them money. They know that reducing lead time is good. So I think the best companies don't need this very much. They don't have to be convinced that this is the right thing to do. Where I would say that for the companies that aren't there yet, who think this is just another thing we'll do off to the side here, it's not really the initiative or the way we're going to run the business. They're looking for some way to understand how this is impacting the business in order to get it to a point where they don't care anymore. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
That does make sense.
they aren't convinced that this is adding value and they don't see the impact. And so you capture some of these things for a while, and then at some point they'll say, you know what, we don't really need to track this anymore. We're on board. We get it. Because this does take extra time in a lot of cases to put this savings together and track it for a year in some cases. And I'll talk about that here. So yeah, the best companies, they know it's the right thing to do and they don't bother asking for it. They say, yep, if you save time, I know it's going to flow through. Even if it doesn't directly on that one project as well as it could have, they know that in the long run, it's all going to make sense. So I would say the best companies don't really spend a lot of time on this and worry about it. Anyone else have thoughts on that? It's a great question, Dominic.
I'll jump in because, as you were talking through that, I was thinking, yeah, because the real benefit is to the person that's doing that process, the nurse, the person working on the manufacturing line, that their work is easier. And that doesn't directly relate to like that dollar amount. The real value is in making the work easier. And if everyone's like happier because the work is easier, that is the benefit because it perpetuates the next improvement.
Yeah, they're excited. They like their work better. They come with more ideas because they feel like there's an avenue for that. They're more productive when they're engaged and they do get more things done. And then they're better at satisfying customers. More engaged employees do a better job with customer service. That's always good for business. So yeah. So I hope that I answered your question there. But go ahead, Amanda.
I just like to add, whether it's financial benefits or whatever the benefit is, like you're talking about, where it's not necessarily tangible, it's a feeling, it's a change that people can talk about, but maybe they don't have, a concise way of communicating it. I think whether or not we're putting it in financial benefits, there's a huge benefit to making it something tangible, visible, that people can see, because that communication can go so much faster. So I agree with what you've said about the financial benefits, but I would say that I think it's really important from a change management perspective to make sure that we make a celebration out of all the positive impacts of the project, regardless if they're financial, regardless how they impact the business, because that's going to take us to the next project, and get more people engaged.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I think that's what we want to not lose sight of, is that these are some of the benefits, but there's obviously way more than that, and we don't want to overlook all those. Okay, so part of capturing the benefits is then being able to figure out, well, where did we start? And so we also have to make sure we spend a little bit of time figuring out your baseline. So where are you at today? I like to go back at least 12 months. It's been really interesting the last couple years of trying to help people baseline their data with COVID and other pandemic challenges. Seasonal effects are also can be tricky. If you just look at the last couple months and you're in the middle of a seasonal effect, then your data is going to change in a couple months anyways, and that could make it look better than it actually is. So we need to make sure we're honest about our baseline and say, is this real improvement, or are we just in a blip or a cycle up or down in our actual performance? So you have to understand our business situations and make sure we go back far enough to make sure we capture what is our current state. And also look ahead and say, all right, that's where we're at right now, but with growth, with projected sales, with demand that we're seeing, our baseline is actually going to be higher than that going forward. So our costs are a certain amount today. That's going to be even worse if we don't fix this problem. And so I always like to think about, where would we be 6 to 12 months from now if we don't do this project? Because that's actually what will get a lot of attention too. And I've done some projects that weren't the biggest opportunity right now, but in 12 months, they were going to be the #1 problem. Let's not let it get to the #1 problem. Let's work on it now, so when we do ramp up, we can actually do that much easier and much less cost in the long run. We don't have to wait for the cost to hit us and then react. If we don't have data, then we have to try to get some reasonable input and estimate. And I would go to the manager and the leader of the area. I would work with the project leader and the finance, and sit down, the three people here, and figure out, what are you comfortable saying is the baseline, so that when we get done, we can capture the difference and you'll feel comfortable with that difference, so that we're not just making up numbers here. And then we're going to project out, some estimates there. And then as we get better data, usually after maybe we have to start collecting data because we don't have that data available today. Maybe after a couple of months, we can look back and say, all right, here's our real baseline. And maybe we haven't really got too deep into the improvements yet, that we can now re-baseline at that point. So we can always reevaluate as we get more data and more information. And again, these are probably on like larger projects where we're going after significant savings, not like small little improvements or kaizens that we might be doing. And then estimating impact going into a project, we want to work with the finance team to measure that at the start of the project. If you wait to the end, a lot of times people will say, sorry, we could have tracked this for you, but now at the end, it's too late. So any kind of large project where you think there's a significant cost savings, I would pull in someone from finance to talk about what you're trying to do and where and how we could measure this at the end. Just like any kind of improvement, we want to pull in as many people early into the discussion, not too late where they weren't participating and now they're resistant because they didn't get included and maybe we missed something really important. And then we're going to estimate these in these different buckets. So you don't take the totals of all these and mush them together and add them up. You have to report them out as separate buckets of financial money because they impact different areas and they're not the same thing. $100,000 in cash flow benefit is not the same as $100,000 of income statement benefit. So you can't add those two together. You have to keep them separate. And that really kind of blew my mind a little bit. And when I first learned about this is how, wow, they're basically like different buckets of money. I talked about increasing or decreasing activity. You know, your project may be losing sales, losing outcomes, losing clients. That has to be adjusted for too. That says we're on a negative trajectory. We're trying to adjust for that as well. And you have to be able to show that you lowered it less than what it was already decreasing. Okay, so we don't want to just take advantage of the natural cycle of what a business and say that we've done something meaningful when we might not have actually done anything. Also like to give estimates not in terms of a single number, but try to do stuff like confidence intervals and go say, all right, our estimate is a certain average, but we have a plus or minus around that number. So we can give a ballpark of numbers instead of just a hard, simple number. And then after any improvements are made, I like to track for the first couple months just to make sure that I'm seeing results, things are flowing through. And then a lot of companies will say you have to track it for up to 12 months. And I would say this is probably more on the companies doing a lot of Six Sigma work, which is a really strong element of Six Sigma is this cost savings and tying it back to the business and showing the value and the impact and giving that back to management to keep them engaged and excited about the improvement program. For companies doing purely lean, kind of like I talked about in the last question, was there just isn't that rigor that is expected. But my rule of thumb is the larger the potential benefits, the more time you should spend trying to track these things. So if you're going to save $5,000, don't waste anyone's time trying to accurately measure that. But if you're going to save $5 million, yeah, we could spend a couple weeks trying to make sure that number is good. Okay, another question that comes up is, do the time that the employees spend on the project or the improvement or in the Kaizen event, does that count against the project benefits? So do we subtract that off? Some will argue yes, because that's the total investment on the training and the project work. So we can see the true investment. However, sometimes that can shortcut the process and we don't pull in enough people or the right people at the right time because someone's trying to watch that budget and say, I don't want to spend too much on this project, but it ends up costing more money somewhere else usually when we don't bring the right people in at the right time. So the other perspective is don't count that because they're going to be doing something with their time. They're going to get paid a certain amount of money throughout the year. They're 40 hours a week. Do we know that they'd be spending that on something more impactful? We don't know. Maybe this project is way better use of their time than what they were planning to be doing. So the money doesn't change. It doesn't mean that the company has to now spend this extra money. They're already spending that money on the resources, you know, at least from the labor standpoint. So why would we say that's an extra cost when it's already a cost that's being incurred? And so that can be, one problem is that you might not allocate the resources properly and we end up running short on people or we overload someone because it's not really being accounted for or allocated out like we have this many time to work on each of these different projects. So that can be one disadvantage there too. And this can be an additional thing to have to track how many hours people are spending each week. But I would say if the cost is outside of the typical costs that they were already going to incur, like if you're bringing in a consultant to help, then that would be a new cost. And we do want to track that as part of the investment. Or we have to purchase something. So I had a project where we were saving electricity and we had to purchase little buttons that we were installing onto the wall. So if someone didn't like the setback temperature when they came in at night, it was too hot for them or too cold, they would press the button and it would give them 2 hours of the normal temperature. Those cost money to purchase. And so that was part of our project cost, but then we could show that we were going to pay for that very quickly with the savings we would get. So I was working with a supplier. They were having a lot of shipping delays, which were impacting our customer deliveries and sales. We also had their product fail at our test process, which costs us time in running the test and then reworking the product. We put in a budget of about $1 million to get more test equipment because of the poor yields. and hire additional technicians to be able to increase production output and meet those deliveries because we were falling short. We started a Six Sigma project to conduct with at the supplier to help them with quality and delivery and work through that. So these are the buckets of money that were captured as a result of the project. So from an income statement perspective, the supplier made enough improvements that they were able to lower their internal costs, and they passed on some of that savings to us as the customer, resulting in $500,000 a year that we did not have to spend anymore. So it's income statement because we were paying a certain amount already for that part. We also were able to lower our overtime by 20% or so, saving about $5,000 a month or $60,000 per year. And we were already incurring that overtime cost and then could show that that went down. Okay, so that's income statement because those are real costs we were already paying for. Now we're not paying as much. Cash flow, we had 2 fewer days of inventory, which is about 10 units, and we reduced that to 6 units. So reducing the work in process inventory by about $40,000 based on the value of those units. They were about, I guess, $10,000 each. 2 units were placed in the stockroom for safety risk mitigation, which we never had a chance to actually build that inventory up. We were always so far behind. So we actually take a negative 40,000 because we stuck, actually that should be like 20,000. So we put some of that back into a safety stock to protect us for future disruptions because we weren't sure how stable they were yet. They were seeing good results, but we didn't want to rely completely on just-in-time delivery. We increased the output, which allowed the company to get 2 more sales per year earlier than planned. So this one is not growth because there were already orders on the books. We were just able to fill them faster and get paid for them sooner and go through our inventory faster. So we didn't have as much cash flow at the end of the year, but it would have been growth if we had fulfilled 2 more orders that weren't on the books. That would have been growth. So here's the example on growth would be the company then was feeling more confident and they put in 10 more orders that they weren't going to purchase before because we were struggling to meet that demand. So now they said, it looks like you're catching up and you're able to deliver. Now we feel more confident. We'll give you a few more orders because we were holding back these. So that would be where it falls under the growth bucket. Avoidance, we canceled the order on the new test equipment. So there's $1 million of capital we did not spend. It's not savings because we hadn't spent it yet. We were going to, so it was in our budget. And then we didn't need the 2 technicians. So those job postings got pushed out or delayed or canceled. So then again, it's avoidance of money we don't have to spend. And then soft savings, the test yield improved, reducing the technician's time. So that could free them up to do other improvement works or do some training or cross training or just take time off. Sometimes, just actually go on vacation or leave work on time, stuff like that. Soft savings, because we don't know that they're going to leverage that free time and add value with that time. It could just be, I'm going to talk to my coworker a little longer now because I don't have to rush anymore. And so if you estimate 4 hours a week with 4 technicians at $50 of vested, that was the word I was looking for, vested hourly rate, it would be about $40,000 of soft savings.
Like when you were discussing the original buckets and where the buckets go, that's almost like finding out your stakeholders for your project and project management. I think you go back a couple of slides and you started to talk about all the buckets and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like finding your stakeholders. Anyone who has any potential stake in the thing, from finance to lawyers to whatever. That is a stakeholder, and therefore you talk with them and see what their costs and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we often miss too, is we see time savings and then you go ask the other stakeholders and like, actually, I've seen benefits from that too. I used to go do XYZ to deal with this problem as well. And that used to spend 10 minutes a day. And I've been, and so we start to see all these other things that happen. Oh yeah, when there's a defect, it's not the technician's time, it's also quality has more work to do. They pull together a meeting of 3 to 5 people, and they're in a meeting room for an hour each day now to talk about this recent issue. I mean, you can really start to see the full impact of some of these problems once you pull all those different groups together and say, how are you impacted, or how are you freed up now that we've addressed that issue? So yeah, I think that's really important. Is it's a lot of times more people are impacted than we realize.
Have you seen technology make flagging potential savings easier in any of the buckets more than others? Like I could see somebody saying in this new ERP system that we have, there's a drop down for me to like put a flag next to, I don't know, something that's on our P&L at the end of every month or something like that. Like, have you seen leaps and bounds of like how technology has made this easier to kind of gather all of these cost savings at the end? Anything that like sticks out to you?
Not in an ERP system. At least I haven't, but I haven't also worked with an ERP system very closely for about 10 years. So
It could be any system. It doesn't matter.
I'll share what we've done in other locations. So one is simple Excel spreadsheet, literally, of project and then savings by month, and then that kind of totals up. That's where I would recommend people start. We actually did purchase a software that was a project management tool for running improvement projects. It was pretty expensive, but it had a ton of functionality, and it would give you across multiple sites. It would tell you how many different projects are going on, what the projected savings would be, and then you put your actuals in there, and it gives you a plan versus actual report, and then it rolls up those numbers monthly, and you could use that as a metric to roll out, okay, this month we had across the site $412,000 of income statement and $250,000 of growth and 4.7 million of cash flow benefits. And so it did all those buckets and stuff, but it was a standalone software that you would populate and run. And so we would manage that software. And the main reason was from the improvement project is we had 8 or 10 people in our Center of Excellence group. And our manager wanted to make sure that no one ever came to him and said, we don't know if you need all those people. He wanted to say, here's the projects we've been working on, and we more than pay for ourselves in terms of value. In fact, you could probably hire X more people in our department because there's plenty of opportunities still out there, and all of our people are saving more than their salary, sometimes 5 or 10 times their salary. And it's not like it's just them, it's them working with a team, but the idea would be our people are helping these projects get done and realize those benefits. And so, yeah, that's probably, as companies mature, then they probably will look for like a off-the-shelf solution. And there's some good ones that are out there for managing all those buckets, but I haven't seen it tied into ERP system directly, but maybe someone else has some insights on that. Okay, so there's an article here. I'm just linking to it, but I'm just going to explain. This is something I saw as a case study that someone put together. It said that they claimed that there was $800,000 in benefits. And they said that $250,000 was a bottleneck to sales that was removed, realizing an increase in annual profits. $245,000 was a reduction in setup times, which reduced wasted time and added a much needed capacity. $100,000 was overtime in this department that was eliminated. $5,000 was material inventory reduced, and $200,000 was expediting that was eliminated. So maybe they estimated the time it was taking to expedite. So based on what I went through, how would you properly bucket these into the right categories? And remember, I'm saying it's incorrect that they added those all together. That's not the right way to do it, because these are different buckets and you can't add them together. their impact is different in the financial, even though they're all dollars, they don't add all together. So why don't we start with the first one here? A bottleneck to sales was removed. So we increased profits by achieving sales that were prior to this were not being met. Which bucket do you think that would go under? There was income statement, cash flow, growth, avoidance, or soft savings.
Probably growth.
Growth?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were missing those sales before. There was demand already, but they weren't fulfilling it. So, yep, I would say the 250 would be going into the growth bucket. Okay, good. How about 245,000 in reduced time? Any thoughts on that one? Income statement or hard savings or cash flow or growth, avoidance or soft savings?
I'll try for soft.
Soft savings? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else agree? Not sure. Charlie's right. It's soft savings. Because it's time savings and it's adding capacity, but we don't know if we're going to meet that capacity or need that capacity right now. If they said it was, and maybe I use much needed might be a little tricky because it sounds like it's needed right now, but if you're just saying now we can handle more work if we get it, then it's still soft savings at that point.
But if
But-
we,
Oh, go
if
ahead.
we showed then that we use that capacity to take on 2 more new contracts, then
Yeah.
we could put it in another bucket, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So we were now able to go after those projects that we weren't going to go after, or the customer was willing to give us more work because they saw that we had the capacity. And sometimes that does come into it. They'll say, we're not going to give you more work because you can't keep up with the current work. But now that you've shown you have that capacity, we can, so I've worked in some stuff where we had 2 suppliers, we were one of 2 suppliers providing to our customer. And so they would kind of look at both organizations and manage the sales depending on who was doing better. And they're always going to keep 2 suppliers from a risk standpoint, but they would ebb and flow how much sales they put into each organization depending on how they're doing. So where they're saying, we're going to hold back some of these, we're going to give them to the other supplier, but now we're going to bring some of those back over to you now that you've given us more confidence. Yep. Overtime in the department was eliminated, $100,000.
That'd be income statement, right? That's hard savings.
Yep.
Okay.
Because we were already spending the money in overtime and now we have less. If we were going to have overtime, but we prevented that, that would have been soft savings or avoidance. About $5,000 in material inventory was reduced.
Is that our cash flow?
Cash flow, yep. And so that's $5,000 that we could leave in the bank and not, or use it for investment into other, I mean, you're not going to invest too much with $5,000, but you could put that towards, research and development or other things like that. Or you could leave in the bank and earn interest on that money. I think the number I usually heard is 8% for the cost of capital so we would say, if we wanted to try to match this up a little bit, you'd say for $5,000 over the course of a year, that might turn into $400 of interest we could earn on that money at 8% interest rate. And so that's one way people will try to make that number match some of the other buckets, but I would still keep it separate because that number is a little just an estimate. And then $200,000 of expediting that was eliminated. This is probably labor that they were quantifying.
Oh, I was thinking of this. We ran into an issue where we had such a big defect rate, like 40% of our products were defects coming from our casting supplier. So we had months that we were spending like $400,000 to $600,000 just on shipments, and it was expediting our shipments.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is from something different then.
That's a good question. Let me see what I put here.
Oh.
I put it under soft saving. I think it was the expediting time, but that's a great comment because that would be a hard savings if you were overnight shipping stuff to get to a customer, and now you're not having to do it. You can send it regular ground or your other channel. Then you would say that would be a hard savings. Yes.
Oh, and not in oh, I guess, yeah.
If
okay.
you're already if you're already overnighting those products, then yeah, you could say we're no longer doing that. We don't have to because we're meeting our schedule and we're keeping up and we're running more smoothly. So this one, I think I interpreted it as they were saving time. So that would be a soft savings because again, we don't know what they're going to do with that freed up time. Now, that's what the best thing you can do with that freed up time is let's take that and let's, do a cost avoidance by saying we're going to free up this person and now we're going to cancel that job rec. Or we're going to redeploy this person over to another area, help them actually meet their schedule and allow them to hit some of their growth that they haven't been able to meet. Or we're going to bring this person over and they're going to be process improvement person and they're going to help the team reduce their costs. And maybe we can help eventually get some hard savings with that extra person around helping make things better, if that makes sense. So it's all about what do we do with that freed up time? And that's whatever they do at that time may hit one of those other buckets more formally. Otherwise, we leave it in that soft savings bucket. So I didn't have one for avoidance on this in this particular example, but that would be the other bucket. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover for today. The question just around, is this something that you get asked about? Do you have to capture cost savings? Are those things that are normally discussed in your improvement work? And then any questions about anything I covered? Those are the last couple of questions I just want to leave it open to. So,
Are there books available on this?
good question. Specifically, no, for around that I know of for process improvement. My boss that kind of taught me this worked at GE, where they were like very meticulous about capturing savings. And they claim that they saved $5 billion when Jack Welch was CEO with their Six Sigma projects that they were doing. So they had it down very, very precise. I think that some of it now the definitions and stuff would fall under just general finance, I believe, and how they would look at that. But you might have to find something that's very specific to improvement work or savings. I'm just not aware of a resource out there because I just kind of learned it through coaching and mentoring.
Will this talk be available?
Yes, we're recording it, so you can. We'll post it
Okay,
on our podcast and our video YouTube. Amanda, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so kind of going along with what you've said about not putting everything in the same bucket, but then we do go with the example of GE saving $5 billion. So isn't that an example of us putting it all in the same bucket? Like,
yeah, that's true. No, I wonder how they did. Yeah, I'll have to go look back and see how they did that. Good point.
yeah, I haven't seen it broke down any further either. And I asked because I'm genuinely curious to see how they navigate that challenge. Right.
I think actually, so trying to remember now the 5 billion number, and that might have, I know that they were, some of that was like stock benefits to the organization too. Like the stock
Okay.
was more valued there. I was trying to remember if that was a 5 million number, or well, they would have had their project, all the details of their project. So yeah, that's a
And
good
I've
question.
seen
Actually.
very specific, like organizations be very specific with hard and soft.
Yep.
But not necessarily down to the individual 5 categories. They may say these categories count as hard benefits and these do not.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it broke down that way.
I'm
so.
guessing that they're adding them all up, and that's not right.
Yeah,
Because
according to their
it's
own.
like you can't. So like it's say the inventory is a good example, right? I delay spending $1 million for 1 month. And on products, that's not $1 million savings. That doesn't, you're still going to spend that $1 million. You just delayed it a month. So, but if you add all those numbers up, it looks like you saved, or you divide it by 12 or something, you know, like it's just when the cash comes in, it's the time of the cash. It's not that you are saving the cash. Now, if you say we canceled that order because we didn't need it anymore, that's different. But if you're just saying I'm delaying that, so anything where they are lowering inventory levels and then counting that and adding it to other buckets, it's apples and oranges in terms of the math.
Well, and
I
I'd
think it
add
happens a
on to that.
lot incorrectly.
I'd add on to that estimated, proposed, actual,
Yes.
right? Like, did you actually track this and see the results, or, you know, are we thinking that's what it's going to be and we didn't come back a year later to see if it was?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Lots of
my guess,
intricacies.
and I'll see if anyone else has any thoughts on this. My guess is most of the time we're not estimating the cost impact. If we are, it's an estimate. Rarely are we tracking it for an extended period of time and publishing actuals where finance has said, yep, I back this number, this is real. So I don't know what everyone else's experience has been with that. So if anyone has any other thoughts around that, but I don't see it done that often.
I can share a little bit. So I don't do a lot of cost tracking in my work now, but I have worked for companies where there was a very structured, there was a very structured Kaizen promotion office, or like the continuous improvement office. And with that, there was a process that we were following that prioritized the projects. Like, it had the full backing of finance. We'd get a finance person assigned to us to help us figure out the cost savings, because this is not my area of expertise, in these different kinds of buckets, so that when we put our A3 report together of the project, there would also be timed intervals that we would check in, that we'd have to report out on the project at least 3 and 6. It might have varied per project, but there was several times that we check in after that. All of that to say that takes a lot of overhead to manage.
Yeah. Right.
So in a big company where that isn't, where those resources are available, that's great. But not everybody has that kind of not everybody has those kind of resources available to them.
Yep. That's what I would say. It's only for the bigger stuff, track it that well. Don't worry about it for the smaller stuff. If you're just curious and you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, that's fine, just to get a ballpark number, but I wouldn't go in depth with it and start trying to run detailed data until the numbers get bigger, where it makes it worthwhile.
And I think that's an important thing also at the beginning of your projects, is sometimes people come to you with a project idea and it seems fairly insignificant, but once you actually sit down and do an activity like this, you're like, this is a $25,000 project easily,
Yep.
you know, and that's maybe just talking to 1 or 2 stakeholders. So it can really transform the way we see the impact of something little as well.
Yeah, I've seen it both to help sell a project, that it's more important than they realize, and also it's not as important because there really isn't as much benefit as we think there is. Let's look over at this one that has much more potential.
And that's important to learn too, right? Like, let's spend our time on the right things.
Right. I want to spend on stuff that's meaningful and impactful.
Yeah.
And you're going to struggle with resources when the project is going and you're trying to get people pulled in and they're like, why should I spend my time on this project? And you can use that as this is why we're doing this project. So it's selling the team and the support people you need to do that project. And that will come back, really be handy to help convince people. Remember, or like, this is the other thing that happens. You're going to get more projects assigned to you just naturally. And so to be able to say, you're taking me off of this project, that one better be huge compared to the one you're taking me off of, because that one, here's the potential benefits on this one. So what's the potential benefits of this one that you're pulling me off of to work on that? And if they don't have a good answer, then leave me on to finish this project. So I think that could be a way to help us not get overwhelmed with projects or get overloaded or just people dumping more work on our plate. Okay, this is my contact info. If there aren't any other questions. Yeah, we'll put this out.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Thanks for attending.